I'm here.
Okay, everyone, attendees coming in. Welcome, everyone. We're going to wait until some attendees get into the room here to get started with today's program. I'm going to let you know that I am recording. Thanks for everyone's attendance today. We'll kick off in just a moment here as folks enter the room. It's great to see everybody, some familiar names and some new names here. If this is your first time joining Main Street America for a webinar, welcome. Welcome, and we hope this is useful information for you. If you are participating today and you have joined us for previous programs, particularly if you joined us during the Main Street Now conference for the packaging the value of your Main Street program session, there may be some redundant information in today's program, but we hope that we are providing useful information, up-to-date information on this very important topic. So still some folks rolling in, slowly seeing those numbers come up. But again, we are recording. Attendees are on mute, and we'll kick off here in just a second. All right. Great, fantastic that so many people could join us live today for the program. We did have almost a completely packed house on this, so really appreciate everybody being here today. My name is Kelly Hamerkowski. I'm the Director of Government Relations at the National Main Street Center, Main Street America. And I'm pleased to present to you today just on the concept of accessing recovery on Main Street. We're specifically talking about the American Rescue Plan and programs available to cities and including what could come down to Main Street programs there. So just a few notes before we begin about webinar logistics. Of course, if you're on this program today, this is a webinar, everyone is muted, there's no video option, but we do want to make this engaged and offer you an opportunity to give your input on what you're hearing. So we will be asking for you to participate in a couple of polls during the program today, and we would hope that you would use both the chat and or the Q&A function if you want to ask a specific question to our speakers, please use the Q&A function. Katie on the program here will help us make sure that we are surfacing all of that up. And I will Katie and I will also be monitoring the chat. So if you have ideas that are not something that's represented here, use the chat. If you attended the Main Street Now conference, we all got used to using the chat. So we would encourage you also to do that. The program is being recorded and we will make it available later as soon as we can on the Main Street YouTube channel. We'll also post the slides on the mainstreet.org/advocacy site. And on that site, and we'll chat it out to you later in the program, we do have a form to collect your ongoing feedback about the American Rescue Plan and what you're hearing about implementation on Main Street. We just want to know what's going on out there for you so that we can be responsive and provide resources that help with the things that you're seeing. So we always appreciate you using that opportunity. If you, Katie chatted in the link to mainstreet.org/advocacy. That page is now directing you to the specific content around what we're talking about today, accessing the American Rescue Plan and getting that recovery into Main Street. So those resources will be discussed and always appreciate, again, your feedback there. So just as an overview of what we're going to cover today. So as soon as I turn it over, Patrice Fry, President and CEO of Main Street America, will make some introductory remarks. Then we'll do an overview of the American Rescue Plan. Again, if you participated in the conference or maybe in some other programs, you might have heard some of this before, but we want to give you some up-to-date information. And then specific strategies for Main Street in how to access that locally, kind of what we think we're hearing most, what would be most useful for you to do at this moment. And then we'll have a Q&A with Kim Lane of Pigtown Main Street in Baltimore. She is part of a group putting together a proposal locally, and we want to hear about where she is in the process, what she's hearing from her city as feedback, and use that as an example for those that are also thinking about or starting to engage in these conversations. And of course, then we'll close the program with audience Q&A so that everybody has an opportunity to jump in here. So with that, I will now turn it over to Patrice Fry for some welcome remarks.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. Great to see such a good turnout on today's webinar. Kelly, I want to thank you for putting together this program. And Kim, I'm really excited to hear from you about the specific work happening in Baltimore. I think we'll all be able to take away some valuable learning from that. So as I said, thank you all for making time to join this webinar. This is a unique moment for us as Main Streeters. There is more funding flowing from the federal government to states and local cities than we may have ever seen in our lifetime, and more than we are likely to see again. And with that, and specifically given the way that we see COVID has impacted our main streets and impacted our small businesses, there is just a really important opportunity to connect with our local leaders, connect with our state leaders, and make the case for the need to direct some of that funding to our main streets and to our main street small businesses. So Kelly is going to take you through a great program today, really getting you up to speed on what the American Rescue Plan is, what the different pockets of funding are there. And then we'll, of course, spend some time talking about how best you all can position yourselves to take advantage of this funding. So I think that's it from me. I do want to just make the quick point, I bet Kelly is going to touch on this as well, that the rulemaking for how these funds are to be used, that is not yet complete. We're still waiting to hear about that. But certainly it is our understanding the spirit of the law would very much support the use of these fundings to help the recovery of our main streets and our small businesses. So I'm sure you're going to talk more about that, Kelly, but did want to make that important point at the top. All right, so Kelly, you want to take it from here?
Thank you, Patrice. Thank you for your leadership. And I am ready to dive in a little bit about the American Rescue Plan. So as we get started here, some of this, again, if you've been paying attention to other conversations, you've participated in the past, it could be redundant, but we need to make sure that everybody's on the same page as we understand what was part of this package that was announced and signed into law on March 11th. So it's a $1.9 trillion package, obviously with the holistic goal of helping the nation recover from the pandemic, and included many things that are far beyond the scope of this webinar, including direct payments to Americans, unemployment, an extension of unemployment benefits, housing, education, obviously vaccination, other things. But there are specific pots of funding here that are applicable to main streets and small businesses, of course. So as part of the SBA, of course, there's the extension of the Paycheck Protection Program. There was more funding allocated to the program, and it was extended until 5/31, immediately after the passage of this. So right now, the program ends May 31st. There's conversation right now about whether or not the program will be extended. There is an ongoing need, and I've seen more recent advocacy efforts from other organizations about more direct grants to small businesses, but there's still an existing need, of course, to support small businesses. So this is not probably the end of that conversation, of course. The Shuttered Venue Operators program was established actually much earlier in the December package, but is finally just getting off the ground as of this Monday. So the program is open. It is currently taking applications. You can access tons of information on the SBA website about shuttered venue operators. Those are specifically, obviously, for entertainment venues and folks that were impacted severely by the pandemic. Applications are being accepted in order of the impact, right? So the most severely impacted businesses first. The Restaurant Revitalization Fund, we will talk momentarily more about this. There's additional information coming out today, including finally some information about when the actual program will open for applications. So we'll talk about that in a moment. The other program that we have not necessarily heard full information about yet is the $175 million Community Navigators program, which is under the Small Business Administration, a program to help to help programs that are helping small businesses. This may be very applicable to our Main Street communities. We're still not exactly sure about the dynamics of the program, but this would support organizations like SBDCs or other entities like those organizations that are creating the connection between SBA programs and the small businesses. This is an area where this could be you. This could be you, particularly if you've been tracking your impact. And this is also the language around this program is very oriented to helping historically underserved businesses in communities that are hardest hit by the pandemic and in rural areas, right? So that could be many programs in our network that will be applicable to, and we'll provide more information. The State Small Business Credit Initiative is a re-upping of a previous program to provide capital and entrepreneurship funding to small businesses. That's something that the CDFA, their community development finance folks have been paying a lot of attention to. So if that's something interesting to you, you can connect with CDFA for more information on that. The Economic Development Administration received $3 billion in additional funding, with a 25% carve out of that funding for tourism and related entities. So we're paying attention to that a lot. Main Street America has been part of the effort to have EDA receive additional funding. We are super excited for that funding to be there. And now we're trying our absolute darndest with the administration and congressional offices to see that that funding could be utilized in Main Street districts. That's an ongoing conversation around how the Economic Development Administration works. We are so happy that some Main Street programs, congratulations to the programs across Missouri for accessing funding from the CARES Act through that program. Again, we are adamantly seeking more ways that that funding can be useful in Main Street districts. And then the biggest bucket, the one that we'll talk about most during this program, is the state and local funding. It's a $350 billion program to deliver direct funding to states and localities. This is unprecedented in terms of how of government response to economic emergencies. It's never quite happened like this before, that money would go directly to cities and states like this. So again, a quick word on the Restaurant Revitalization Fund. Just today, earlier today, the SBA announced that the registration portal opens Friday at 9 a.m. EDT. That is when restaurants can go onto the SBA website and create kind of their restaurant profile in order to be ready to apply. Applications begin Monday, 5/3 at 12 p.m. EDT. This money is expected to go extremely quickly. So if any restaurant out there is interested in your district to access this funding, we highly, highly, highly encourage you to check out opportunities through the Independent Restaurant Coalition. They have a webinar at multiple times every day this week, kind of going over the application process. And then also Katie has just chatted into the chat box, a special opportunity that's happening later this week to hear directly from SBA Administrator Isabel Guzman as part of the SBA's rollout of this program. So we would encourage you to attend that briefing if you're able, coming up tomorrow. So that program will again go over all of the details of this, but it's always nice to understand it directly from the SBA as best as possible. And we're grateful to the folks at Independent Restaurant Coalition and other organizations who have been really putting together a lot of information on this. And yes, so I'm seeing in the chat, if you go to saverestaurants.com/resources, that page has all of the Independent Restaurant Coalition webinars listed, and you just scroll down and again, they're open to us joining any single one of those and want to be partners as best as possible. And yes, we will post a copy of these slides when we post the webinar recording. So moving on from the Restaurant Revitalization Fund, we want to dig in directly to the state and local funding. So again, this is unprecedented, entirely unprecedented, this $350 billion in direct funding to states, counties, and municipalities. And I think for everybody on this webinar, you may have different levels of participation. Some of you are statewide coordinating programs. Some of you are are at your local Main Street programs. And I think we probably have some other folks in the mix here who are, maybe you are with your cities, maybe you're with a different economic development organization. I just want to emphasize, I'm mostly talking about the municipality funding in this program, but there are, there's funding allocated to your states, right? If you are organizing for your Main Street program holistically at the state level, states are receiving funding through this. Counties are receiving funding through this. National Association of Counties is putting on additional programs for counties to understand how to work with this funding. But generally what I'm talking about here is the funding that's going directly to municipalities. So what we know, every municipality is going to receive an allocation. This is different than, if you recall, the money that was allocated through the CARES Act for relief to states and municipalities. That money only went to entitlement communities, larger communities directly, and states then received money to divvy out to smaller communities. And a lot of communities didn't actually ever receive direct funding through that. So, some folks have kind of responded to this saying, we're not going to see money through it. The guidance with this program is that every municipality, all 19,000 municipalities in the United States, will receive funding through this. So if your population is above 50,000, you receive money directly from the Federal Treasury Department. If your population is below 50,000, it does go through the states first, and then it's kind of allocated on a population basis, where you cannot receive more than 75% of your last pre-pandemic budget, right? So if your community below 50,000 and you see an allocation for this, and it says that you're going to receive $8 million, but your last budget pre-COVID was actually $7 million, you can only receive up to 75% of that $7 million is the general guidance here. So there are, and I did not have this as a link, but I will also make sure to include it in follow-up. It is on our website on mainstreet.org/advocacy. The National League of Cities does have kind of a chart that just shows what each city's allocation is going to be. So you can go there to find what your city is going to be allocated if you need to do that. And thank you, Katie, for being super responsive. Sorry, going back. The funds will come in two tranches, two pots. So one is supposed to be coming in the time frame for getting this program off the ground was 60 to 90 days after the bill was signed. So the bill signed March 11th. And so that means that we are looking at May 10th to June 10th-ish. The allocations to cities over 50,000 should come first. They should come within that 60-day time frame. And then the cities under 50,000 should come within the 30 days after that. Again, the states cannot interfere with the amount of money that you should be getting from that. The second pot of that money would come a year later. So we're looking at May, June 2022. Overall, the deadline for spending this money is set at December 31st, 2024. So there is some time here. We've heard some mixed things, right, in terms of cities being extremely active in deciding what they're going to do with the money and already having a plan for this. Versus some cities saying, we have a little bit of time here. We don't need to spend this money until the end of 2024. Let's think really about what our priorities are, right? So we've heard on both sides of that, but there is a timeline here that allows until the end of 2024 for this money to be used. There's a lot of stuff, as Patrice mentioned at the top, that we don't know yet, because along with the funding coming out in mid-May, that's when we actually expect to see the full guidance on the regulations for this program. So there may be adjustments to exact amounts. In the initial allocations, some cities were just left off the list. So there had to be some backtracking and rethinking about what those looked like. There may be some restrictions on uses that we don't know. So it's supposed to be broad, but again, what gets interpreted and what comes out as guidance is different than what appears necessarily in the legislation. There's also going to be reporting requirements. It's going to be really interesting to see what that is. This is money that's going to 19,000 municipalities. So it's going to be difficult for the federal government to keep track of every dollar spent there. But we will, obviously everyone, cities and anybody who's being allocated money through the cities will want to be understanding what those reporting requirements would be. And then a question that we've heard, and it would be interesting to get more guidance on, is the money must be spent versus obligated. So I know that's a question coming up, and it's a couple of specific instances where people might want to say, by December 31st, 2024, can we have said what this money will be used for? It all has to absolutely be spent. Or put it into some sort of longer term funding. That's a little bit unclear. I would imagine that it needs to be spent, but there might be some more flexibility there than we're aware of. So taking a breather, I'm seeing some questions come in. I'm going to hold on to them because I want to make sure that we kind of get through the details here. But some specified uses in the legislation, the main 4 buckets that the legislation says that this funding can be used for are economic impacts from COVID, recovering locally from COVID economic impacts. That's us. Revenue replacement for COVID or specific pandemic losses. So if you expected, there's some questions here about what exactly this can mean to a city, but if you expected so much tax income and that didn't happen, you can revenue replace. And then if you also had specific, we spent X for the pandemic, that would be an applicable use. Premium pay to essential workers, so actually paying up to $13 an hour for overtime pay, essentially, to folks who were essential workers in the pandemic. And then the infrastructure, and there's lots of questions on this, that infrastructure uses for this funding are water, sewer, broadband. In the legislation, there's some questions because it says water, sewer, or broadband. So some folks are asking, can we do both, or do you have to pick one? We're waiting for more guidance in Treasury on that. And I think that's where some of the X factor comes in with some of our Main Street projects, as to say, is that infrastructure? Does it have to be covered under this? Can it be just a direct COVID economic impact? Okay, so that's the specified uses. Then the legislation also specifies that you can transfer funds. You can transfer funds, your city can transfer funds to a private nonprofit organization. So if you are 501c3, 501c6 Main Street program, your city can transfer funds to you to use for COVID economic impacts or potentially revenue replacement. Cities can also transfer funds to state government, special purpose, public benefit corporation. I think our most specific use is private nonprofit organization. I did see the question come in, and Dawn, I'm not sure about it. Can cities transfer to counties? I am not sure about that. It doesn't specify. So, but I did see your question come in. I haven't heard anything on that. So I'll have to look into that and get back to you. Okay, so on the horizon, the kind of most recent information that has come out for this, and I just want to attribute here too to the National League of Cities. They've done a fantastic job of being at the table with Treasury on some of the questions that are coming in about this, because they're obviously highly connected to the city leadership across the country. And so a lot of the good information that I'm providing is taken from some of their resources. So on the horizon, the most recent guidance from Treasury, not having full guidance yet, is just that cities need to be preparing for receiving these funds by having their DUNS or SAM number ready. So a city over 50,000 needs to prepare by having both the DUNS and the SAM number. Under 50,000, you don't need a SAM number, just a DUNS number, but in order to receive from the state. So that tells me, one, if there's any cities on the line and you haven't heard this yet, that's good information to know. And secondly, we're getting ready, right? There's obviously movement at Treasury to get folks ready to receive these funds, but we're not quite there yet. So again, May 10th about marks 60 days from the signing of the plan, and that is the anticipated window for when we receive guidance on this, and then the initial disbursement of funds, and then for those smaller communities that should come within the next 30 days after that. So we're going to know a lot more soon, hopefully. But obviously there's still some outstanding questions here. But again, from partners like NLC, they're sending specific messages to cities. And I think what's important for us to know as Main Streeters is what our city leaders are hearing from the organizations like their municipal leagues or Conference of Mayors or NLC that they might be paying attention to for how they should be thinking about these funds. So one of the key pieces of guidance is for cities to assess, for cities to take a look and say, what not only are the government needs, but what are the community needs? I think that's a key role for Main Street, with an ear to the ground to the community, to understand what the community needs are there and help your local governments understand what's happening in your downtown and in your district. The other piece of guidance is to use each revenue source strategically. So I think I saw something in the chat come in about housing. There are tons of other buckets of funding in the American Rescue Plan. I went through some of them at the top. There are some specified housing funds in the American Rescue Plan. So there are other areas. So if cities are seeking a specific project, particularly with what might be applicable through EDA funding, if you could propose a project there, if there's specific other areas in that whole $1.9 trillion package, you don't just want to take your ARP money and just apply. You want to look and make sure that you're using those buckets appropriately. There's actually a great article if you are looking at those broadest buckets, if it's your view, if you're a city leader or otherwise, and you want to look at all those broad buckets. Bruce Katz at the NOAC Metro Finance Lab has really put together a piece that talks about all of those different buckets. I believe it's posted on our mainstreet.org/advocacy site, but if not, I will put it into the chat as well. But if you really want to look at all those different buckets, they're out there and you could understand them all. That's a little bit beyond the scope of this webinar, but that is also being guidance given to cities. I wanted to be clear about that. So prioritize fiscal stability and returning to work, of course, and maintain records and document your impact. Again, I think that's an area where Main Street programs are particularly primed because we are already doing that. So you can help your city by being a partner there. And make sure that your congressional delegation is a part of your success. So I think specifically because of the way that this funding is coming to cities for the first time ever like this, organizations like the National League of Cities and any other organization that advocated for this funding wants to see that we show Congress that this was a really good use of funds. You as Main Street programs, if you are a recipient of this funding, please be at the table and make sure you're communicating about the value of that to your program, and let us know about the value of that so that we can help you. Okay, I'm gonna switch to a slightly different element here. And this is really, we've talked about kind of the different buckets of ARP funding. We talked about the ways that cities are hearing about this. And so now it's kind of thinking about, what about our Main Street programs? How should we be thinking about this locally? So we've put together some guidance for you based on kind of discussions with other coordinating programs across the network, the statewide programs, and some of our Main Street programs, and thinking about how this could be best utilized and what you could be doing right now if you haven't yet taken these steps. So again, here's where the polls are going to come in a little bit too. But I want to start though this section with just checking back in with our founder, Mary Means. If you checked out her most recent book, one thing that she says in it that struck me as particularly useful in this moment is that the best plans are framed with resilience in mind. We have to be thinking in two dimensions right now, meeting immediate needs and looking ahead to be able to respond to opportunities that might arise. So of course, we've all been impacted by the pandemic. We might have immediate budget needs. That's one area that we're going to be looking at here. But it's also about having a vision for how Main Street can move forward into the future. So never a bad time for a Mary Means quote, of course. But the three strategies that we're going to talk about real quick right now. Participating at the table in recovery conversations, right? If cities are forming local task forces, this is about you participating in that and being a part of that activity at the city level. Advocating for funding for pandemic budget impacts. Earlier this year, actually in late December, we ran a survey that said that 91% of you Main Street programs reported an increased need for support services to businesses because of all the great work that you've been doing during the pandemic. You've been seeing that increased use of your time, but also 2/3 of you said that your budgets have been decreased because of anything that might be happening at the city, loss of membership revenue, loss of support from sponsorship. So we know that there's a mismatch between demand and need out there, and these funds could help you with that. And then third, of course, is creating and sharing that vision for projects in the future for your downtown. We'll talk a little bit more about all three of these things. So, okay, I want everybody to participate in a poll really quickly. So I'm going to ask you, has your city done any of the following in relation to ARP funding? Have they set up a local task force? Have they held any open meetings for input from the community? Have they asked for the input of your Main Street organization? And if there's an other here, be happy to have it in the chat window. I still see a lot of votes coming in, so we'll give it just a few more seconds here. Appreciate everybody's participation. These polls are really helpful, not just in this moment, but helping us understand how to respond better and help you going forward. Okay, and Carmen, thanks for that. Carmen said that the mayor reached out to her board chair directly, but nothing public. Feedback that most cities are looking to pad their budgets, but nothing public, not allocating. This is where advocacy can come in. Some people are holding some public sessions, but let's see what the polls say here. It seems the biggest thing that's happening is maybe nothing, right? But again, this is the single biggest opportunity coming to our Main Street programs, and not just to our Main Street programs, but our cities in quite some time. So the nothing is concerning, right? The none of the above. 20% of you said that you have been asked for input. That's fantastic to hear. 15% of you said that there has been a task force set up. So thank you very much for participating in that. So what we think that you should be doing here, or just some simple thoughts about what you could be doing here. And again, there's lots coming in the chat, and I think everybody's feedback is important here. Identify some key board members. Maybe it's, you know that you have your board member who has a great relationship with the city manager. You know that you have somebody who is involved in a different area of council. Have a meeting, share this information, whether it's your next board meeting and you want to walk through some of what we're sharing here today. If you want to play some of this back about the possibilities of this funding, there's lots of information circulating about this. Share articles. There's some posted on our website. Make sure that everybody understands that this could be an opportunity for Main Street. Pass through to nonprofit entities is an option to cover pandemic impacts. Leverage connections on that board and start conversations with city leaders. And if there's a task force, if there's a meeting, just ask to be at that table, ask to be involved. Now, we'll talk about this a little bit further, but I wanted to point out that getting to the table is part of the task here, part of the goal. So next, we're going to talk about specific for advocating for funding for your pandemic budget impacts. And I have another poll for you. Getting to poll 2. Have you done any of the following to communicate your impact during the pandemic? So your options here are, have you tracked the number of businesses supported by your organization? Actually kept a list, right? Have you gathered testimonials from businesses that you have supported? Have you created localized talking points about your impact? Our downtown has helped X number of businesses do this. Here's what a business owner says. And have you shared this information with the city and other funders? I didn't put it, I haven't done any of these options. I guess I don't think that that's an option, but perhaps it is. And this is great. We're getting some really great feedback here. Without a none of the above option though, I recognize that. If you haven't, take this as a moment to think about it. Okay. And Mr. Mayor, who has tweeted, he's chatted in that he hesitates to start conversations on spending the ARP funds until we have guidance from the Treasury. We're right with you. We want to make sure that people are prepared, but it is difficult to really say until we have that full guidance what's going to go on fully with what we can use those funds for. But thank you for that. So I'm going to end the polling here and share our results. So it looks like a lot of you have tracked the businesses supported by your organization. That's fantastic. That's really important that we get into the mode of doing that. And a lot of you have been sharing information with funders. What we have a little bit less of is gathering testimonials and creating talking points. So just want to highlight those couple of things as action steps here. So Katie should be chatting out, or she might have, and it might have gotten buried, but on our website, we have a list of ways that you could potentially calculate your impact relative to the pandemic. If there's a worksheet there, walk through it, see if those are applicable to you, write down some numbers, go back through your email, your phone call list, figure out, hey, I helped this many businesses access this much money in terms of recovery funding. Also, gather testimonials from your businesses. It can feel a little bit awkward sometimes to say, hey, will you say how great I am? But we all need to get into the habit of doing that so that you can accompany some of the numbers of impact with little stories. That's always a good thing to do. We also have on the website some talking points. These talking points are broad, but include areas where you could fit in your localized data to make these talking points your own. So take them off of that sheet, put them into your own document, slap your logo on it. Doesn't have to be super fancy, but we do want you to put all of these things together, and so that you have a handout ready to go and saying, what did you do for the city during this time? What did you do for our community? You have this written down. You can hand it to somebody if they're considering whether or not to support your organization as part of recovery. And so our last strategy here is to share a vision for downtown going forward. As Trey's chatting in, y'all have probably so many different plans on a shelf somewhere about things that you could have done over the years. And some of them are going to be super applicable to this moment as well. So we want to make sure that you are being prepared with a vision for what could be achieved in your downtown. Should there be excess funding that's available, or should you want to make a proposal to the city? Should you be asked, are you ready to say, we need $500,000 to do this project? That's a lot of money, but it's not absurd in this environment. Or we want $100,000 for more business support grants, right? So here's a quick poll, the last poll that we'll do. What are the types of projects or plans that are most important to your Main Street in recovery? Is it downtown building improvements, such as facade improvements or upper floor housing? Is it infrastructure, perhaps streetscapes, sustainability projects? Is it small business and entrepreneurship support? It could be incubator spaces, co-working spaces, grants to businesses, getting businesses online. And then long-term uses of funds, if allowable, right? Would you consider something like a revolving fund or something other endowment fund for the Main Street program? And then if you have other ideas, we're always here, always interested to have you chat those in. We are interested in knowing what's most important to you on this list so that we can provide further opportunities to maybe have some project ideas at hand. But it's up to you locally to define that vision, to make sure that that proposal that you would put together is supported with data. I cannot tell you how many meetings I've been in recently where people are throwing out extraordinary numbers about what to do with government money, but they don't have any real data to back up what to use with those, why that is the appropriate amount. So always have that at hand and be ready with examples, perhaps from other communities. Okay, so thanks for everybody who has participated in our poll. I'll just share these results real quick. It looks like the biggest ongoing need, of course, is small business support services, entrepreneurship, for co-working retail grants. And then pretty even draw across the other concepts of what you might do if funding was available for your downtown. I really encourage you to be thinking in your next board meeting, maybe this isn't the strategic planning session for your whole organization for the end of time, but if you could identify a use right now that you could make a play for, what would that be? And have some project idea ready to go as this funding becomes available, in order to make sure that if somebody says, what does Main Street need? You can respond. Okay, now we're going to turn to somebody who's actually doing that very concept that we're talking about. So I am pleased to be joined by Kim Lane. Kim is the executive director of the Pigtown Main Street program in Baltimore. And I asked Kim to join us today because she had communicated that she was working on something for the city, with the city of Baltimore and with other Main Street programs there. And Kim, can you just give us a little bit of background and tell us what you're working on?
Hi, sure. Hi, everybody. So there's 8 Main Streets in Baltimore, and we're a Main Street program that's separate than the state, although we partner, of course. And so we are under the mayor's office of small and minority owned businesses, which is great because that puts us on a little bit higher platform. And we've been just through elections and such a time without a Main Street coordinator, although we have a new one. And he is just wonderful, but we've kind of been, I just want to give some background in that we've been used to kind of being a collective group of really kind of coming together and having to figure out kind of our advocacy roles and our ways to work together without a coordinator for a little while. So when I was approached by Senator Van Hollen, our local senator, who wanted to have a chat with Main Streets about this funding and some other, just hear how we were doing through COVID. Our Main Street coordinator set that up. Through that process, we just initiated with the other Main Streets here in Baltimore. Let's put together a list. Let's put together, a list of what I call immediate impact with long-term results. And that's the way kind of Senator Van Hollen here in Maryland described the use of the funds. So collectively, we just kind of brainstormed out a list, and it's being packaged now. It's still in a draft form. In fact, I just added endowment because I hadn't thought of that. But really what it includes are some things that when Main Street started here in Baltimore 20 years ago, there was a need to get it going fast. And so it includes some of those strategies, things like technical assistance on retainer, architects for facades, tech support, things like that. But more so what we put in is under a category, it's business recovery, retention, and attraction. And one of the things that we all have in common that we've learned is businesses will no longer fit out a space, right? Restaurants who had to spend a couple $100,000 fitting out a space, didn't own the building, they really got hurt through COVID. So we put in things like tenant fit out. We put in things like emergency funding for rent for, say a window gets broken, things like that. We also did a loan pool for capital improvements for businesses. We put in streetscaping, safe neighborhood design funds. And part of what I'm most excited about is we're putting in a shared grant pool for the 8 nonprofit Main Street groups. We're all 8 individual nonprofit organizations here. A shared loan and grant pool for us to do community development work, meaning when you have a vacant on a block and that building owner won't do anything, is if it goes to tax sale, or receivership, any legal process with the city, that we can come in, purchase, or partner with an investor to purchase and get the vacants moving off of our commercial corridor. And so part of that, which I think was a strategic good move, is we put in funding for the city so that when the mayor and other folks get this proposal, they'll be able to see, it just kind of shows the broader strategy. So we put in funding for additional code inspectors, for additional legal, for additional attorneys to help move along some of our vacant property owners, especially, and then also additional support for our coordinating body, because it's one and a half people, and the full-time person has other duties. So we need to, we also put in money for positions within the city. The strategy to make it happen is Senator Van Hollen's office and a few of a couple of congressmen are going to work with us to put that in front of the mayor, to make that a highlight with the mayor. And then all of the cabinet members will be copied, and all the city council. And also, like I said, since our Main Street program is under the mayor, within the mayor's office, of course, it'll be sent to that person and the mayor. But, and then we just have relationships. We have a lot of relationships with the mayor's office, with people in the city council president's office. When we just went through our last mayoral election, we organized a meeting with all the Main Street managers and just the mayor, and that was great. So yeah, that's how we're doing it. I will say we are not going, I think we're at like, 7 or 8 million a year. But there's some big ticket items in there, right? Like the loan pool and for buying properties. And now I just added the endowment in there in my head. So, but the Baltimore City is getting 670 million, and they have not asked for outreach, and they have not included organizations, and Main Streets haven't been included, at least not in a collective way. And so since we're the ones on the ground, we know what's needed. Nobody's asking, so we're being very proactive. And yeah.
Kim, how are you buttressing the argument with any kind of documentation from businesses that helps support that, particularly around the use of space and knowing about build outs and what's needed there? How are you framing that so that the cities understand?
Well, we were fortunate our state granted to Main Street grant funds. So for example, we got $250,000 to put out a competitive grant process to our businesses. So we have a lot of great data from that. We see what the businesses need, for example, so we'll be able to really use that data for the emergency fund. And then also some were for expansion and for pivoting. So we have that data. And then we kept track of how many, businesses we've worked with who are successful on loans and grants. Yeah, I'm going to have to pull data from all different places. It is a little bit of a task because all the Main Streets here in Baltimore don't keep all the same data. So, yeah, it's going to be a little bit of a task.
And it's new and different.
I'm sorry?
Is it new and different then than what you would have regularly been collecting?
For our organization, probably not, because we do collect a lot of data, because that's just me. But we can't get all the data from all the Main Street groups. So it's hard. So we'll be giving very specific examples using data. Mm-hmm. We're not going to be able to do a lot of data from all 8 Main Streets. Right.
That's understandable. I just want to emphasize too, how in terms of developing those relationships, that it's fantastic to be able to pull on the relationships that you have with Congress folks, Senator Van Hollen and others. How did you develop those relationships over time? Because it's helpful to already have that kind of conversation started when an opportunity like this arises. Well,
I mean, we invite the elected officials to, every big event, right? Small Business Saturday, our annual festival, things like that. But then for at least for our organization, we also send out updates every so often, right? And all the elected officials are on there, and then being active, showing up to testify when there's a bill, right? And city council, or really just having the relationships with Senator Van Hollen. He hired a former city councilwoman who I knew, and she called me. And then, but Baltimore is a very small, it's a big city, but it feels like a very small place. So it's really just constantly, we have a new city council person here in Pigtown. So, you invite her out, you go for a tour, you just keep the relationships. I mean, I consider building relationships the second most important part of my job. The first being supporting the businesses, of course, but I mean, I think, so that's how we do it. And then, like I said, we organized a meeting with the incoming new mayor with just the main streets and gave a very short presentation. But he's been out to most of our organizations already, so.
That's great. And Kim, I hope you'll keep us informed about how the ask goes as you pursue this. Of course, the example of Baltimore is a little bit, it's small city, but it's also much bigger than a lot of our Main Street programs out there, but certainly elements of that can be applicable in smaller environments, and also taking the example of developing the relationships over the time is applicable absolutely anywhere.
And I would just like to add, when we had our meeting with Senator Van Hollen, he emphasized that he really wanted to see Baltimore use this money to close the digital divide, that was very important to him. And I also had the impression that was important when they approved this bill, period. Mm-hmm. So just if that helps anybody to know. So.
Kim, sorry to burst in, Kelly, on your Q&A, but Kim, that makes me wonder, are you talking, when you say digital divide, do you mean the challenge of getting small businesses online and selling?
Everybody online.
Everybody. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Baltimore has such an issue with so many kids not being able to do online schooling.
Right.
So he needs across the city.
Across the board. Okay.
He also emphasized that we put together our proposal. We mentioned to him that we were thinking about this, and, he will be, hopefully it's going to come from his office to the mayor. So,
yeah. Right.
Supporting.
Right. Powerful ally to have in your corner.
Absolutely. Well, I do want to turn now and make sure that we have time to just cover any Q&A that we have from the audience. And Katie, if you have the opportunity to let us know if there's any particular questions that got stuck in the chat, that's fantastic. And then we'll finalize this with some next steps and resources. Just one Q&A question that I saw come in, I want to make sure that we address this from Abby. Is there an approach that Main Street should take to access funds from the Economic Development Administration? This is an important question. And I'll say first here that much like the regulations that have not yet been fully released for the American Rescue Plan funds that we're talking about, the EDA has not yet released a NOFO, a Notice of Funding Opportunity, for how it's going to exactly handle the funds that have come in through this $3 billion allocation. We are interested, again, in making sure that Main Streets could access that funding, but it's also important to understand the ways that typically EDA funds work through economic development districts and on a regional basis. So the most successful application, if you wanted to look towards your state, your city, your area, would definitely be in partnership with others, right? It's a difficult application process to go through if it goes the same way that the CARES Act funding did. And that minimum funding level would really be at like 100,000. So again, that's why we are seeking ways to make it more applicable to Main Street programs. But I'd be more than happy, Abby, to also talk to you about that. I'm looking at some other questions that have come in. Alice's question is quite long. Yes, but basically I think I'm getting the, looking at the link that you sent and understanding a micro grant program for businesses as an applicable use of these funds. I think that it would be, right? The guidance that we've also heard here is that if there was a use of funds that was, if you could do it with the CARES Act funding, if you put it together with CARES Act funding, it's most likely eligible use for these funds, right? So make sure, any examples that we have of CARES Act funding that helped support micro grants, which this could have been, but there were, again, different pots of funding have different specified uses always, of course, but we expect that a micro grant program to small businesses would be applicable through this. And having that business survey is, of course, really, really important.
Hey, Kelly, looking at this, the most recent question that Katie put at the top, what is the process for us, a nonprofit with a Main Street, to request our city to transfer some of those funds to us?
There is no process. You are making it up. So to revisit kind of that, this one, again, is an unprecedented kind of happening in terms of the way that Treasury is dispersing funds to every municipality in the country. It's really never happened before. So the concept that then this pass-through is happening is also kind of unprecedented, which is why you need to be prepared to make that ask, why you need to have some data at hand, why you need to be able to say, this is our specified need, whether it's we suffered this much of a budget loss, or we have this project idea, this vision for downtown, and we anticipate being able to utilize this much funding to produce these results. Either way, to request that funding, this is not there's no form that you can fill out, right? If your city creates a form, please send it to me. But there is no form for you to fill out necessarily that will help guide this process. You have to be proactive, and you have to ultimately be prepared to make that ask. And we all know, I'm sure that everybody here, if you're a nonprofit, you've made uncomfortable asks before. This is one that shouldn't be uncomfortable though, because this is the spirit of this legislation, is to help the local economy recover.
Absolutely. So Kelly, one follow-up question. It's a question about revenue replacement. So would revenue replacement be relevant for loss of a program, event revenue managed/operated by our organization? So basically, if I'm understanding this question, yes, you would have every opportunity to go to your city and say, look, we have lost revenue during the course of the pandemic. And we believe it is a very, very consistent, suitable use of the funds to help support this organization in recovering some of those lost revenues. Kelly, there was a point I wanted to raise. First, Mary Helmer asked us about infrastructure and whether, asked about broadband and whether the funds could be used for broadband. I think the answer is we probably don't know yet.
We would anticipate yes. We would anticipate that communities can, but there is some question still about the exact infrastructure uses. And then the way the legislation is written is raised questions about if you could use it in multiple ways for infrastructure that is concerning to some.
Right. Okay. And the other point I would make to this group is that there is very likely going to be a very large infrastructure package that makes its way through the Congress and, results in funding that would be available for things like broadband. So we've heard cases, particularly like in Michigan, of some communities there being told, oh, we're going to deploy all of our ARP funds to infrastructure. I think it's, your number one talking point when you hear that, I think, is, look, we know infrastructure is important. There's likely to be subsequent funding available to support that. Let's focus on the very real and very present needs and dangers to our downtown and to our small businesses.
I know we have just a couple of minutes left in the hour. I want to point out, just while we have a moment here, that we do want to always get more of your input. There's lots of great chat coming in. Specific areas that you have questions about, specific funding and or uses that your city is telling you, it is most wonderful for us to hear from you and keep track of that. And there is a form on our website. Katie has just chatted it in. If you're able to add any comments about how this is being deployed in your community, we would absolutely love to stay with you through this process. And that helps us ensure that other Main Streets hear the message. I learned about Kim's project through a chat box. It's effective. One final, I saw a question come in from Thondra for Kim. And so I hope that we could end with that question. The question, Kim, from Thondra Lanise. Hi, Thondra, down in Florida. She's saying it's wonderful that you partnered with other main streets across Baltimore. And I think it's a good question for all of us here. Do we recommend that multiple local programs band together to advocate regionally? For example, her congressional district includes 3 active Main Street programs. And Kim, do you want to talk about the power of kind of banding together with other Main Streets? And then I'll contextualize that a little bit within this opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, the power of, there's always more power in a group, right? And in Baltimore, I mean, we cover all different areas of the city. And also, I think something that is powerful when you have multiple districts together is it's easy. For example, in Baltimore, it would be easy for them to look at our strategies and say, we also want to do this on other commercial corridors. And they're also considering expanding the number of main streets in Baltimore. But yeah, you want to cover as many, also when you have as many folks together as possible, you're also covering so much more of the political power, right? You're covering more councilmanic districts, you're covering more Congress districts, well, if it's all one congressional district, but still, everybody's going to be fighting over this money. And so, how do you get your biggest team together, right? I think that's the way I think about it.
Yeah, and I think for money that's coming, if we're talking about accessing the money at the city level, right? Obviously, if you're in a smaller community with only one Main Street district, you might not have other Main Street districts that you can partner with. But if you come to the table at the city level in a community that only has one street program with a collaborative ask, that also partners with other organizations across the city, this might be a time to make sure that you're working in collaboration, maybe with tourism, maybe with the arts programs, maybe with the chamber, to make sure that your ask can serve multiple needs and that you're showing a unified front from kind of the economic development collaboration in the city. So I think that's a strategy, but also there are so many opportunities to work with other Main Street programs on advocacy. We will explore all of those. So thank you for that question, Thondra. There's so many more good questions and chats in here. Just to say, this will not be the last program that we have on this. I think we will follow up with more information about the potential to talk more specifically about ways to support small businesses with this funding and opportunities for you to be more specific about your ask. We will post a recording of this program as soon as we can to the YouTube page and make sure that you're all informed about it along with the slides. And again, please continue to check back on that website as we post more updates there and use the form to communicate with us. I'll say we're a couple minutes over the hour here, so I'll just say thank you very much. Thank you extremely much to Kim for presenting your ideas as they're being formed in Baltimore. It's so great to hear about your example and the success you've had with your advocacy efforts. And Patrice, thank you so much always for your presence and leadership and help with the questions.
Well, Kelly, thanks for leading this and putting it all together. And as you said, more information to follow from us.
Right.
My thanks as well, Kim. Congratulations. You're clearly out in front on this. So we're all following your lead here.
Well, I love the conference, and I loved what I kept hearing through the conference was we're built for this. So I think we're also built to get the lion's share of this funding. So
absolutely. It's
let's
there
just
for
go.
the taking. Just got to go out there and get it.
Awesome. Well, wonderful. Thank you to everybody. And we'll see you back on another program we hope soon.